Siegfried and Ruth were going to accommodate me at their home in Kirchheim Teck, and prepared a room for me where I could sleep and study for as long as I wanted. Knowing my situation, they intended to make my stay permanent. If necessary, they would become my second set of parents, possibly adopting me, but I had no idea how they could achieve it. Much later, they declared that they had been successful in doing so. However, I had no idea what it was, for nothing had been explained, and everything was kept in the dark. Maybe this was the Jehovah's Witnesses' way of living. When and if nothing could legally be done, they still wanted to make it official through different ways, but were unsure if I would accept it. In fact, I always remained neutral. Whether they succeeded in that endeavor or not was not important to me, for I had different issues to consider. For instance, paying any debts incurred on my behalf, therefore needing employment. My acceptance into a university course in which I was interested was extremely important, whether it was agreeable to the witnesses or not. For I knew that they never considered higher education necessary, believing that in the New World Order, after Armageddon, all the chosen of God would have a chance to learn supreme wisdom. However, I could not see any logic in their assumptions in regard to higher education after Armageddon, when all the known institutions and unfaithful men of science would be gone. I am sure that the Strohbachs will remember how eagerly I traveled to various cities in Germany to discover where I could be accepted for university. It was excellent that on arrival I was immediately employed by AEG, the German General Electric Company. There was a clean, interesting, and reasonably well-paid job waiting for me. However, I was also going to explore opportunities to study medicine, or psychology as I was keenly interested in them, and certainly mentally prepared to sit the entry exams. With a nice part-time job in place, I was able to look after my needs, paying for necessities as well as my educational fees. Bearing in mind that most of my childhood had been full of desperation and fear when in Ankara, I felt the need to hide my true background for fear of being belittled and ridiculed. Even when sharing the schooling system therein, I always attempted to put my hands on roll call papers so that I could alter parts of my assumed name, and when one of the other students or teachers read them, they could not mention my full name. It never made any sense when my surname had a certain ending, which declared my actual background, which I needed to hide from others, while my brother's had no such attachment with his. It also did not make any sense when, at family gatherings, it was often said that not having that kind of addition to our surnames was wise while living in Turkey. But then I used to ask, why did my father, who originally did not want me around, trying to force my mother to miscarry, and so to end my birth, register a surname which I had to hide? I wondered why my name had an additional Jan, whereas my brother's had none. I thought that it was probably for a purpose so that, when an opportunity arose, I could be disposed of as per his original desire. It was obviously his chosen name, but I kept asking how he survived the ordeal, or was it perhaps wrongly recorded by someone else? He was very determined to reject me, and now his desire to get rid of me was becoming a reality, for I was never going to make the effort to get close to him. This was only out of respect to him as my father. At the first opportunity, I was going to change my name, for I did not want to live with an assumed one, which caused much embarrassment and ridicule. I will be telling a lot more about my unwanted name of Karabükyan, which German officialdom either deliberately or unknowingly changed to Karabikyan, and would not take any note of my attempts to correct it. Perhaps they just wanted it to sound similar to their own tongue, bypassing my intelligence. After all, they had to be right. Now in Germany, I needed to improve my language skills, even if it meant a reorientation course through one of the higher education institutions. The Strohbachs were very eager to help me with spoken German. By associating with them and their relatives, shopping, listening to their local broadcasts, and literally forcing me to think in their language, certainly helped me. That was an interesting adventure in itself. However, my studying discreetly at a university towards an exciting and fulfilling future would most certainly be considered as being too worldly by the witnesses. Although it was not their problem, I was unsure how the Strohbachs would take it at the time, for they were heavily involved with the witnesses. I was prepared for any out-of-the-blue situation. The witnesses prefer to study only the Bible, preach the Word of God to others, and spend more time pioneering than educating themselves. Educating oneself towards making money was seen as materialism, which a witness should always avoid. But hard work in simple and boring employment which did not entertain or occupy one's mind fully would be just enough. How was one to deal with the situation without detection of one's intentions? Work was important for day-to-day expenses and educational fees, but studying at one of the universities was paramount. Although the Strohbachs would probably not oppose me, knowing how eager I was to take part in entry exams, even discreetly encouraging me, perhaps I could do all that within a wonderful plan which my childhood friend suggested. First, I decided that I was going to do a full-time job to pay my debts in a very short period of time, buy a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and save towards my educational fees. Then I could do a part-time job to provide me with an income. This way, I could spend more time at university. Weekends were reserved for outings, more discoveries about the German way of living, and outdoor activities such as playing tennis or flying sailplanes through a club. It also meant many sleepless nights studying. Since my arrival in Germany was a new experience for me, I expected to be met by Siegfried or his wife at the Stuttgart terminal. But it was not to be. Maybe I was dreaming of that also. Remember, it was the absolute first time that I had been there. When in Stuttgart, passengers from other countries were subjected to passport and ticket inspections, and some were detained in some of the offices. My knowledge of German being inadequate, I thought I would have minor problems with that. But many of the officers spoke either French or English, and a few attempted to speak Russian. Announcements were presented in several languages. For the first time ever, I felt completely lost for a little while, saying to myself, "Pull yourself together, Soren. You can do it." In that instant, I became aware of my childhood friend saying, "Come, my friend, We can certainly do it. That gave me the confidence to move ahead with complete trust in myself. For who else could I rely on? Having decided to have a snack and a hot cup of milk in one of the food outlets located within the station complex, I admired a few bright and bubbly German girls. This made me forget my fears for a little while. When I called the Strohbachs to let them know that I had arrived, I was told that they were expecting me to take another train to where they lived, suggesting that I could surely find my way to their address. That sounded challenging, if not irresponsible. I told them that I had never been to this part of Germany before, and therefore I would appreciate it if they would meet me at Kirchheim Teck station. They did, but probably a little reluctantly. I was surprised, but was not going to let it spoil the fun. It was interesting to see a large card held up high with my name on it. Siegfried was swinging it from side to side, and they were very excited about my arrival, just the same as I was. They had a small car which he drove, and both could not control their excitement, even when we arrived at their 2-story home, which was built like townhouses. Some of them were known as Betriebhäusern, the houses in which only workers for whatever company employed them were housed. It was evening, and I was asked if I wanted to have a bath before or after dinner, and probably have an early night. I would have preferred to sit and talk with them, but went along with their suggestion. The bathwater was filled with sweet-smelling bath salts to relax the body, and the light food Ruth had prepared included herb soup, thinnest slices of dark German rye bread, and aroma-rich cheeses, which included Limburger. Until then I had never tasted such cheeses, although I had heard of them. I was, however, familiar with blue cheese and Stilton. This was an adventure I had agreed to undertake, and so felt the need to try them. They were certainly different compared with the French cherveux or Turkish feta, but interesting. I spoke partially in German, English, Turkish, and French with Siegfried and Ruth. She told me that her father was a very dedicated witness, allegedly belonging to the 144,000 or small flock under the leadership of Jesus, as allegedly mentioned in the scriptures. Her father reminded me of my uncle in his looks. Then we spoke briefly about where I was to work, and that they had already got employment reserved for me. We discussed what I was going to get paid, and what I needed to pay them for the sublease or my room, for little necessities like gas, electricity, and food, as well as what I owed at this stage for the expenses incurred with regard to my journey. I said that I was going to pay what was owed in full as soon as possible, for I considered it to be my first priority, and they were extremely happy about this arrangement. The next day I was introduced to the AEG factory, after arriving there with Siegfried, but from the following day on I was to take the company bus. The floor manager Manfred showed me around, telling me all about the technicalities of my job as a transformer tester, and various sections of the factory where other parts were manufactured. Seeing a lot of equipment and heavy machinery was very exciting. By now I knew everything from the canteen to the bathrooms, and was ready for this new experience. Through this company I was to become even more interested in electronics, recording apparatus, television, video cameras, amplifiers, and speakers. I contemplated getting a recording device, even if it was old and second-hand, but first I was going to pay my debts within the first 3 weeks. I decided that my adventure was going to be a good one. My childhood friend accompanied me wherever I went, and so another chapter of my life had begun. When I arrived in Germany, it was a bitterly cold winter's day. At the weekend, as I looked out from my bedroom window, all I could see was a vista of white stretching for miles and miles in all directions. The sky was grey with brooding dark clouds, and the trees looked frozen. Nobody could be seen anywhere on the streets for a long while. I felt the urge to take several photographs. Suddenly, the streets filled with families, everybody clothed like cabbages, happily wandering about. Both Siegfried and Ruth wanted to go into the city to show me around, but also frequent one of their meetings. My first impressions of Kirchheim Teck were that it was an old town with wonderfully preserved historic charm, architecture, town halls, schools, shops, and wide streets. My impression of the city will always be of falling in love with it. I did not know how long I was going to stay there, hoping it would be for a long time. What a colorful dream city it was. The sky remained grey in a brooding dark cloudscape, and overcast most of the time, but the city buildings painted the scene in hues of charm and a variety of magical colors. Whenever I visited this city, I always felt at home. I frequented a number of coffee shops, for there were people I could talk to, and also help improve my language skills. Although not many people could be seen around, those who worked in the shops were usually very friendly towards me. However, I later discovered that a number of locals resented people coming from Middle Eastern countries, including Turkey. They often called them dirty Turks or foreign bastards, which I thought was very ugly. I kept silent about that issue, for I was a newcomer, and was not going to spoil things. I thought people normally accepted each other as they were in a civilized country. I suppose I was learning more about the human world. There were no children to be seen anywhere in this city during the holidays, as they were obviously occupied with a variety of activities elsewhere, perhaps even sporting events through their education system. They were probably cared for after school hours through some government authority. It appeared as if Germans could not waste time with their children, let alone their families, because they were occupied with more than one job. I was certainly going to learn a lot more about their lifestyle as time went by. For instance, guest workers from foreign countries were given jobs normally the locals would never touch. And yet many have resented those from elsewhere. I chose to follow this sage advice. Seek the open road, forget the destination, and enjoy the ride. Remembering my arrival at the Strohbach's address for the very first time, discovering how excited they were about my decision to remain in Germany, hopefully permanently, happier still about my desire to pay what was owed on my part, and agreeing to share the living expenses, they could not contain their joy. It gave me enough information about the German way of living, Fairness was my motto, and I knew that this part of the experience was going to remain that way. I mentioned my desire to obtain a reel-to-reel tape recording device a little earlier because that was the only quality system to capture my impressions of existence surrounding me, the sounds of people, friends, and the music, as well as listening to my previous recordings, which I had brought with me. I knew that in days and years to come, new ways of recording would become available, and I was going to adopt them and keep capturing my impressions for future reference. It was going to be a lifelong interest for good reason. As the years rolled by, despite much opposition from so-called close friends, and even my future family's criticisms, the value of recording was going to be better understood, just like the simple photographs I occasionally captured. When the time came, we went to buy my very first recorder. Although an older and bulky one, it was a very efficient Telefunken. By the following week, I was recording my own experiences, music, and listening to my previous recordings. I could not get enough of it, and was so very happy. It was like the fulfillment of a wish I had for a long while. There was a little child in me, and I had to look after that too. Every girl and boy needs their toy. This way, when there were not so happy occasions, one could let the sun shine again, and having a simple toy like the one I had meant that I could deal with those issues more easily. Interestingly, even listening to the sounds of my friends, like those from Ankara, enjoying a musical session, singing and talking with my brother, mother, aunt, and our cousin, Georg, hearing their laughter again was comforting. I needed to feel that connection from time to time. Turkey is one of the most beautiful and historically rich countries in the world, and some musical expressions coming alive in those recordings were haunting, but the country was not a home to me. However, soon I was to discover whether Germany could become my permanent home. According to popular belief, one could become unbearably homesick after a short period of time. But I did not feel it at all for a very long time because I was in the world, could travel to places and discover beauty everywhere. I could create brand new memories, but the more I heard my mother's voice, the more I felt the loss of not being able to greet her with a good morning in English, and the more I missed her. I remember back home, and again I'm repeating myself, whenever a Mormon or witness came to the door, she was furious, as she did not want to entertain nonsense, as she called it, responding harshly to them. Some of those witnesses, noticing her reading coffee grounds, considered her a witch. But she was not. It was a traditional pastime of the Greeks, Egyptians, Armenians, and Turks, and this tradition is an ancient one. Under all circumstances, one can always find a way to live peacefully, joyfully, and without harm to anybody. Whatever we do to others, it will be done unto us. Whatever we give, we receive. Whatever we shout at a mountain will echo and come back to us repeatedly. Sing a happy song, and the world will sing it back to you. The Strohbachs were a little surprised how quickly I was improving with my German. They may not have realized that I was training myself to think like they did. This way, daily expressions of the locals became easier to understand. They did not realize that I was taking part in a German language course as well, because I was keen to understand the spoken language and its grammar. Listening to the radio broadcasts and television programs presented in their language proved to be of great assistance. Interestingly, Strohbachs did not have a television, radio, or any music in their home. When outdoors, at work, or studying at the university, I always aimed to converse with others in their language. Yet there were a number of people insistingly trying to talk to me in broken German. I remember asking them if they spoke German. If they could speak properly to me, I would learn their language. Many were surprised to discover how eager I was to learn their mother tongue. I believed that it would take a number of years to speak like they did, but at least I could converse with them reasonably well. I also believe they appreciated my attitude. I knew one of my grandmothers spoke either German or Yiddish, but I was not sure how well. Unfortunately, most of the voice recordings I made were lost by the negligence of my future partner, and those grands passed on before my departure from the so-called parental home. While the Strohbachs still lived in Kirchheim Teck, we often frequented the nearby hills, villages, and townships. Sometimes we did so just to have a drive, take long walks while chatting on all kinds of subjects without worrying about the time factor. Sometimes we just went out to higher grounds to admire the city lights at night. During one of those nights, Siegfried spoke of his encounter with an orange-colored, round, and intelligently controlled UFO. Apparently he was sitting on the top of a hill, and looking up into the starry sky, he noticed a small orange-colored light which moved slowly, and then started to glide to where he was seated. When closer, its huge size became apparent. He stared at it for a while, but could not remember anything else, saying that he thought he must have fallen asleep. He mentioned this story often, and showed great excitement every time he spoke about it. Interestingly, no matter where they were, at home or in a restaurant, they used to bend their heads in silent prayer. But occasionally Siegfried would verbally utter them. I found this to be a unique tradition of the witnesses. They expected me to do such Thanksgiving prayers silently, but my prayers almost always ended up praising the cook. For some reason, they did not question me about it. Understandably, I was not yet absolutely cognizant with their tongue. When I bowed my head with them out of respect, I used to count in my mind from 1 to 5, or sometimes up to 35. It was very unusual, but nevertheless, as it was their custom, I felt the need to show respect. In my early days in Kirchheim Teck, I was introduced to an Armenian family. The husband was a tailor, but had not been practicing his skills for a while. They were working as a husband and wife team for a cutlery company in a factory opposite my bedroom window in the distance. Although quite far, it used to be extraordinarily noisy, especially in the very early hours of the morning, when most of the neighborhood was still asleep. I also remember Ruth and Siegfried attending the very first day of the Armenian family's little daughter Diana's school ceremony, as was the German custom, and lots of photographs were taken, one of which was given to me. Whenever I look at that and other photographs of those weekends when I used to visit them, I remember it with all the color, laughter, and gossip. The Armenian couple used to invite me to their home and ask me to visit them often, giving me an open invitation. They had settled in Germany long before my arrival, originating from Istanbul with the intention never to return back. They too were into witnessing activities, and it seemed as though I was surrounded by a huge propaganda machine, although I was certain that I could survive it somehow. For them, I was one of their brothers and a good friend. I spoke their language and had an ear to listen to them, but at least I was not being preached at. That in itself was worthwhile, to have friends like them. They did not force what they believed on people like the other witnesses. Maybe their faith was not as strong. They could not attend all those important activities as they claimed, for they were so busy working.